Kale's first day on Virelia Station started like every other day in his career, with a minor explosion, a lot of spilled coffee, and the feeling that the universe might personally resent him. He had tripped over a zero-gravity cable before even entering the main concourse, causing a hovering crate of electronic components to ricochet into the air like a pinball, narrowly missing a small, purring robot that had the audacity to scold him in binary for his lack of coordination. "I am not your mother," the robot beeped, and Kale gave it a weak salute, wishing he'd remembered to bring his anti-gravity boots instead of the cheap knockoff ones that always squeaked when he moved. The station was alive in a way that made Earth feel sluggish. Lights blinked in constant rhythm, distant shuttles hummed, and the chatter of alien dialects ricocheted off polished metal walls. Kale tried to focus on the task at hand, installing a new flux capacitor for the Council's energy grid. But his attention kept wandering to the humans, aliens, and odd-looking creatures who floated by, each moving with a grace he did not possess. Then he saw her, Leora. She appeared from the docking bay like an elegant glimmer among the throngs of busy bodies. Her long ears extended from her head in a subtle arch, twitching in the most expressive way, betraying her emotions before her face did. When she looked at Kale, one ear flicked like a curious antenna, and he immediately knew he had just been caught staring, hopelessly and embarrassingly. He dropped the tool he had been holding, which ricocheted off a wall and somehow managed to hit a passing drone squarely in the sensor array. Sparks flew, the drone spun helplessly, and Kale winced. Leora's lips quirked into a faint smile. She did not laugh. Oh no, she had something better. A polite, amused exhale that made him feel like an infant animal being judged by the entire galaxy. Kale cleared his throat. "Sorry," he mumbled. The drone beeped angrily. Leora raised a hand, her long fingers curling in a gesture that suggested either patience or mild threat. Kale had no idea which, so he opted for another apology. "Really, I mean, that was completely accidental. Gravity zero-G, you know." He waved vaguely at the floating objects that littered the floor. Leora's ears twitched again, and for the first time, Kale noticed how expressive they were. When she tilted her head, one ear flicked sideways, another straightened, and it reminded him of a radio antenna trying to pick up the right signal. He couldn't stop staring, which only made his face heat like he had just eaten a sun-blasted chili pod. "I see," she said, and the tone was dry, tinged with amusement. "A human, then. I've read the manuals. You fall a lot." Her voice was melodic but clipped, almost like she was both informing and judging at the same time. Kale swallowed, trying to think of something clever. He failed. Instead, he said, "I prefer to think of it as strategic gravity testing." She arched one eyebrow, the long arc of her ear twitching sharply, and for a moment he thought she might actually be impressed, or that she was plotting to kick him into the nearest airlock. The idea made him grin nervously. Leora motioned for him to follow her through the station's central hub. Kale tripped on the edge of a gravity field and rolled spectacularly across the floor, catching himself only with an ungainly sprawl of arms and legs. Leora did not laugh, but one ear quivered in a way that was undeniably humorous, and Kale took it as a small victory. "Lead the way," he said, hoping that he did not sound like he was confessing to a lifelong crime. They navigated a maze of corridors where alien shops sold everything from floating pastries to memory enhancement crystals. A group of neon-colored beings with 4 legs and 2 heads stared at Kale, apparently debating which one of them would inform him that he was walking backwards. Kale ignored them, focusing on Leora's steady presence ahead. She moved with fluidity, her long ears swaying slightly, sometimes brushing against the metal walls. At one point, he tried to imitate her elegance by walking lightly, only to stumble into a stack of gravity barrels, which tipped and rolled into a vendor selling hover fruits. The vendor shouted something that sounded like a combination of alarm and an accusation of attempted theft. Kale flailed his arms in apology, and Leora pinched the bridge of her nose, though her eyes sparkled. Eventually, they reached a quiet observation deck. The panoramic window stretched across the wall, revealing the spinning nebula outside, a swirl of turquoise and gold. Kale leaned against the railing, breathless, as Leora approached and stood beside him. Her ears moved subtly, flicking toward the stars and then back to him. "You know," she said softly, "most humans faint at the sight of a nebula this size. You are unusually composed." "I'm good at faking composure," Kale admitted, and realized halfway through that he had just confessed his biggest flaw. Leora tilted her head, and one of her ears brushed his shoulder. He recoiled slightly, but not before noticing that her touch carried a warmth that made zero gravity feel irrelevant. "You're charmingly awkward," she said finally. "Most humans just spill things. You are more dramatic about it." Kale laughed, a short, unsteady sound, because honestly he had been waiting his whole life for someone to describe him as dramatic rather than disastrous. "I'll take it as a compliment," he said. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Outside, the stars whirled in patterns that reminded Kale of pinwheels. And inside, he felt as if the universe had narrowed down to a single line. Leora and her long, expressive ears, her amused glances, the quiet laugh that hovered somewhere in her eyes. And then, just as he dared to think he could survive this encounter without humiliation, he tripped on a stray maintenance bot that had wandered too close. It nudged him toward Leora, and he grabbed her arm instinctively. Her laugh, soft and musical, rang out, ears flicking in delight. "Careful, human," she said, "or I will have to report you to the council as an interspecies hazard." Kale grinned, embarrassed but exhilarated. "I think that's the first time anyone's used interspecies hazard, and meant it romantically." Leora shook her head, one ear twitching, and for the first time, Kale thought he saw something deeper. Curiosity, mischief, perhaps even a flicker of desire. He didn't know what the council would say, or what laws they would break if this continued, but he knew one thing. The galaxy suddenly felt far too small for the two of them not to collide again, and somehow, he was completely okay with that. Kale woke to the persistent vibration of his comm pad, which had somehow ended up wedged between his knees while he slept. In zero gravity, this meant he was gently spinning in midair like an unwelcome satellite, bouncing off the wall and the ceiling in perfect rhythmic sequence. "Good morning, gravity," he muttered, swinging his legs to catch himself. The message on the pad blinked insistently. "Maintenance alert. Flux capacitor overload. If unattended, may cause minor plasma eruptions and one very annoyed councilman." Kale groaned and imagined Leora's ears twitching at the news, the way she would silently judge him while secretly holding back laughter. By the time he floated into the concourse, Leora was already there, leaning against a column with the kind of casual elegance that made Zero-G look like a fashion runway. Her long ears swayed slightly, each flick a subtle punctuation to whatever she was thinking, and Kale had to suppress the urge to wave and make them dance in rhythm with the station's ambient music. "You're late," she said, though the curve of her lips betrayed amusement rather than reprimand. "Traffic," Kale said immediately, even though there was no traffic, "and minor existential dread, you know, the usual." Leora raised an eyebrow, one ear twitching sharply, as if she were trying to decide whether he was telling the truth or simply making a terribly bad joke. "I prefer honesty," she said. Kale nodded solemnly, which was a lie. Honesty had never been his strong suit. Improvising disaster had always been far more reliable. They navigated the station together, a duo of mismatched elegance and clumsiness. Kale tried to match Leora's fluid movements, stepping lightly over floating crates and avoiding the occasional errant maintenance drone. But inevitably, he stumbled, sending a crate of ionized plasma cells spinning into the path of a hovering vendor selling synthesized fruit. Leora's ears twitched in warning, and Kale nearly dove to intercept the crate but instead collided with a hovering mop droid. The mop droid beeped indignantly and attempted to mop him into the nearest air vent. Leora's laughter, A soft, musical sound echoed in the corridor, and Kale could only bow in defeat. "You really do test gravity every day," she said, her tone teasing. Kale smiled. "And it tests me right back." The council had assigned Kale to a minor, though extremely delicate, task, recalibrating a newly installed flux capacitor on the outer rim of the station. Leora had insisted on accompanying him, ostensibly for diplomatic observation, though Kale suspected it was because she found the chaos he attracted amusing. They rode in a small hovercraft, which Kale was certain he had operated correctly, though the craft's sudden spins and pirouettes suggested otherwise. Leora clutched a handrail, her ears bristling in delight at the unexpected acrobatics. "You know," she said, "most humans would scream right now. You seem entertained." "I call it interactive problem-solving," Kale replied, which was only half a lie. He also called it panicking gracefully. At one point, the craft dipped too close to a storage cluster of dark matter crates, and Kale's hands flew in every direction while Leora calmly adjusted a grav field to stabilize their trajectory. Her ears twitched in subtle triumph. Kale laughed despite himself. "You always have to make me look bad, don't you?" "Someone has to maintain order," she said. Her tone was deadpan, but the slight curl at the corners of her lips betrayed her amusement. Kale considered arguing, but the last time he had argued, a small plasma conduit had blown, covering him in sticky blue residue for 3 days. He let it go. By the time they reached the capacitor chamber, Kale's nerves were frayed, but he was also aware of a subtle thrill. Being near Leora in a confined space, with her long ears subtly brushing against the control panels as she moved, made him hyper-aware of every sound, every shift of air, every flicker of light. He tried to concentrate on the flux capacitor, which looked deceptively simple, a lattice of glowing energy filaments humming with unstable power. Kale's first attempt to adjust it involved turning a dial, which promptly caused a small surge. The chamber filled with a soft, crackling glow, and the emergency lights flashed. Kale froze. "Human," Leora said, her voice calm but her ears twitching sharply. "You're holding it wrong." Kale's face went crimson. "It was a test," he muttered. Leora shook her head, delicately reaching over to guide his hands. Her fingers brushed his, and Kale felt the odd sensation of a static charge that had nothing to do with the capacitor. He tried not to stare at her long ears, which seemed to vibrate with subtle emotion. "Better," she said, and Kale almost felt like she had given him a medal. Hours passed in this delicate dance. Kale adjusted, misadjusted, and readjusted, while Leora provided commentary that was occasionally useful, mostly sarcastic, and sometimes flirtatious. At one point, Kale accidentally reversed the polarity of the energy filaments, causing a minor implosion of harmless, yet alarmingly loud sparks. Leora ducked behind a console, ears flicking in mock terror, and Kale shouted, "It's fine, totally safe." "You call this fine?" She yelled back, laughing. "I call it Kale's patented chaos calibration." By the end of the day, the flux capacitor was stable, and Kale was covered in glowing streaks of plasma residue that refused to wash off entirely in zero gravity. Leora looked at him, one eyebrow raised, ears flicking with amusement, and said, "You're ridiculous." Kale grinned. "I prefer charmingly disastrous." Their humor became a bond, a way to survive the absurdity of both the station and the laws that prohibited their kind of love. Each small joke, each shared accident brought them closer, a tacit understanding that this connection, fragile and impossible as it might be, was theirs alone. Outside the chamber, the stars spun in kaleidoscopic patterns, and Kale realized he had never wanted to be anywhere else, nor with anyone else, than right there, beside Leora and her long, expressive ears that seemed to listen to him more attentively than any human ever had. As they left the chamber, Kale tripped again, catching himself on Leora's arm. She laughed, soft and musical, and he realized that even in the absurdity of his clumsiness, there was a rhythm to their connection. Somewhere between plasma surges, hovercraft spins, and sarcastic commentary, A small rebellion had begun, not against the station, not against the council, but against the strict, suffocating rules of a galaxy that refused to allow their kind of love. And Kale, flailing and sparkling, found he didn't care. The council had heard about Kale and Leora's escapades before they even arrived, which meant that their reputation preceded them in the most chaotic way imaginable. Rumors had spread like plasma fire through the communication networks. A human engineered a minor meltdown in the flux capacitor chamber while an alien diplomat laughed. They were seen riding a hovercraft into a restricted energy conduit for fun. One report suggests Leora's ears twitched dangerously at signs of incompetence, viewer discretion advised. By the time Kale and Leora floated into the main hearing chamber, the room was a kaleidoscope of officials, holographic observers, and at least 3 security drones that appeared to be taking bets on whether Kale would trip on the way to the podium. Kale stepped forward, tripped over the edge of a gravity field, caught himself, and then did a very human bow that may have been interpreted as either apology or surrender. Leora's ears flicked in amusement and she leaned close enough to whisper, "I think we're already winning." Kale raised an eyebrow. Winning at what? Getting banned from the galaxy. Leora smirked. Winning at being memorable. The lead councilman, a tall being with translucent skin and a habit of vibrating slightly when annoyed, cleared his throat. "Kale," he began, "you have caused minor destruction, engaged in unauthorized zero-gravity maneuvers, and most egregiously, you are involved in a prohibited romantic liaison with an alien diplomat. How do you plead?" Kale looked at Leora, and she gave him a barely perceptible nod of encouragement, one ear curling over in the most dramatic fashion. He straightened, took a breath, and said, "Guilty of being ridiculously in love. Also a little clumsy, but that part's fixable with duct tape." The chamber went silent, except for a faint buzzing from the drones that seemed to be holding their mechanical breaths. Leora stifled a laugh, her ears twitching in delight, and Kale realized that honesty, combined with absurd humor, might just be his strongest weapon. "You are audacious," the councilman said, a trace of exasperation in his vibrating tone. "And your comedy is unconventional. This is not a laughing matter." Kale shrugged. "Depends on your sense of humor. Also, if I might point out, love has historically been responsible for at least half the galactic revolutions. And some pretty good songs, think about it." Leora added, "He is human, which means he will inevitably break things. But he is loyal, clever in his own chaotic way, and occasionally charming. Also, he makes me laugh." Her ears twitched with a subtle rhythm, almost like punctuation marks. Kale felt a surge of pride and terror in equal measure. He was being defended by an alien diplomat whose very presence made the station tremble slightly with political weight. The hearing devolved into something resembling chaos. Holographic observers projected comments in dozens of languages. Drones tripped over each other trying to maintain order. And Kale accidentally triggered an emergency coffee dispenser that showered several officials in hot, synthetic brew. Every time someone scolded him, Leora's ears twitched in a warning, and Kale learned to dance around their judgment with exaggerated flailing, which oddly seemed to endear him to the council. One of the council members whispered to another, "Perhaps the humor is part of the evaluation." In the midst of the absurd proceedings, a rogue AI smuggler who had been tracking the couple for profit arrived, appearing as a holographic avatar shaped like a juggling octopus. "I can make this even more interesting," it announced, eyes spinning. "I will deliver evidence or something." The council groaned, but Kale grinned. Leora whispered, "Brace yourself, this could get weirder." The AI proceeded to release a torrent of playful holographic pranks. Floating pies, miniature exploding fireworks, and tiny, dancing replicas of Kale that tripped over everything. Surprisingly, the council laughed, some openly, others reluctantly, and the tension in the room fractured into a strange mixture of humor and bewilderment. After hours of deliberation, in which Kale tripped exactly 17 more times, spilled exactly 4 more beverages, and Leora's ears twitched in a near-constant rhythm of amusement. The council reached a decision. "You two," the lead councilman said finally, "have demonstrated audacity, charm, and chaos beyond measure. While interspecies relationships remain strictly controlled, the Council recognizes that love, humor, and defiance have value, even when accompanied by destruction. Therefore, we grant you provisional status. Together, under careful observation, and with the understanding that further chaos will be tolerated if it is creative and entertaining." Kale blinked. "So we're allowed." Leora's ears lifted in triumph, her eyes sparkling. "We're allowed." Celebration ensued, naturally, in zero-gravity style. Kale accidentally knocked over the ceremonial plasma punch fountain. Leora adjusted the grav field just in time, and the rogue AI smuggler projected a disco ball across the chamber. Officials laughed, clapped, and even the drones beeped in what Kale interpreted as approval. For the first time, he realized that defying societal laws didn't have to end in catastrophe. Sometimes, it ended in laughter, exhilaration, and a sense of profound connection. After the hearing, Kale and Leora floated out to the observation deck, hand in hand, laughing at their own near mishaps. The nebula outside shimmered in colors that seemed to echo their elation. Turquoise currents, gold streaks, violet pulses that danced like celebratory fireworks. Kale realized that everything had changed. He was no longer just a clumsy engineer surviving in zero gravity. He was a man who had found courage, humor, and purpose in the company of someone extraordinary. Leora's presence had taught him that love could be audacious, joyous, and rebellious, all at once. "Do you think they'll write songs about us?" Kale asked, trying to keep one eye on the rotating stars and the other on Leora's twitching ears. "They already are," she said, leaning her head against his shoulder, long ears brushing his arm in gentle warmth. "And they'll keep writing them." Kale laughed. "I suppose we're legendary now. I never imagined being legendary would involve this much falling over." "Falling over is part of the charm," Leora said, her voice soft. "It's what makes you human." They stayed there for hours, floating quietly, listening to the hum of the station. And for the first time, Kale felt completely grounded, even in zero gravity. In the absurdity of their adventures, the chaos of the galaxy, and the humor that had carried them through every stumble and accident, he realized that their love was not forbidden. It was historic. They had rewritten the rules in their own unpredictable way, leaving a mark that would ripple through time and across the stars. Kale looked at Leora, her long ears gently moving in rhythm with her breathing, and whispered, "Thank you for picking me." Leora smiled, ears curling just slightly, and said, "I didn't pick you. We picked each other, and that's the point." In that moment, the stars outside the station didn't just spin, they danced. The galaxy had room for them, chaotic, awkward, laughing, and impossibly in love. And as Kale floated beside Leora, he knew he would never be the same, nor would he want to be. Together, they had carved their story into galactic history, proving that love, humor, and courage could defy even the most rigid of laws, leaving a legacy that would echo among the stars for generations to come.